I never reported what happened that night, but it still follows me. My name is Dr. Ellen Marchetti, and I have worked as an infectious disease specialist at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for 17 years. I have seen nearly every variation of human suffering that bacterial and viral infections can produce. I have watched patients die in isolation. I have held the hands of families saying goodbye through reinforced glass. I thought I understood the boundaries of what was possible in a quarantine ward. Ward 7 was sealed in 1987, 2 years before I started my residency. The official records cited structural damage and outdated ventilation systems. The unofficial story, whispered among senior staff during late shifts, was that something had gone wrong during a tuberculosis outbreak. Patients had begun behaving strangely. The wing was evacuated, sealed, and never reopened. The hospital kept it locked. No tours, no storage, just an empty hallway behind a door marked restricted access on the fourth floor. I was covering overnight on February 9th, 2023. The ICU was full. 3 isolation rooms were occupied with a particularly aggressive strain of influenza. I was exhausted, moving through my rounds on autopilot, checking ventilator settings and reviewing lab results that all said the same thing: critical but stable. At 3:45 in the morning, I heard voices, not loud, not panicked, just steady, rhythmic speaking. It sounded like a group reciting something in unison, the way children do during a school assembly. I stopped outside room 4C and listened. The 2 patients inside were sedated and intubated. They could not speak. The sound was coming from above me. Ward 7 was directly overhead. I told myself it was the ventilation system. Old hospitals make strange noises. Pipes groan, air ducts hum. I have heard rattling, hissing, and the occasional metallic clang that sounds almost deliberate. But this was different. This was articulate. It had cadence. I kept walking, checked the next room, adjusted an IV drip, logged vitals. The voices continued, muffled but persistent, like a radio playing in another room. At 3:47, they stopped. The silence was immediate and total. No fade, no trailing off, just gone. I stood in the hallway, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound to return. It did not, but the air felt different, heavier, like the pressure had changed. I should have left it alone. Instead, I went upstairs. The door to Ward 7 was still locked, but the key code had not been changed in decades. Maintenance used the same master sequence for most restricted areas. I punched it in. The lock clicked. The door opened. The air inside was stale and cold, colder than it should have been. The heating system had been offline for years, but this was different. This was the kind of cold that settles into your chest. The hallway stretched ahead of me, lit only by the glow of emergency exit signs. The fluorescent overheads were dark. I could see the outline of patient rooms on either side, their doors standing open. I stepped inside. The floor was clean. No dust, no debris. Someone had been maintaining this space, or something had kept it preserved. The linoleum reflected the dim red glow from the exit signs. I could hear my own breathing. Nothing else. I walked toward the nurse's station at the center of the ward. The counter was empty. Charts were gone. Monitors had been removed, but the call board was still mounted on the wall, its plastic slots labeled with room numbers. Room 7A, Room 7B, Room 7C, all the way down to Room 7F. I turned toward Room 7A. The door was open. I stepped inside. 6 beds, all empty. Mattresses stripped down to bare plastic. IV poles stood in the corners like skeletal sentries. The window overlooked the parking lot 4 floors below. Streetlights cast long shadows across the room. I was about to leave when I heard it again. The voice, not voices. One voice, speaking in perfect unison with itself, layered, multiplied, like a choir singing the same note, but every voice was identical. It was coming from room 7F. I walked toward it slowly. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. I am a physician. I do not believe in ghosts. I believe in microbiology, pathology, neurology. I believe in things I can measure and treat. But I also know when something is wrong. Room 7F was at the end of the hallway. The door was half closed. The voice was louder now. I could almost make out words, but they were in a language I did not recognize. Not Spanish, not French, not anything I had ever heard. I pushed the door open. 6 beds, all occupied. I froze. The patients were sitting upright. Their eyes were open. Their mouths were moving in perfect synchronization. They were speaking the same phrase over and over in that strange layered voice, but they were not real. I could see through them, faint, translucent, like after images burned into the air. Their hospital gowns were old-fashioned. Their faces were gaunt and pale. They did not look at me. They stared straight ahead, speaking, speaking, speaking. I backed out of the room. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. The voices did not stop. They followed me into the hallway. I turned and ran. The door to Ward 7 slammed shut behind me. I did not tell anyone. I wrote nothing in my notes. I finished my shift in silence and went home. But I still hear it sometimes, late at night. When the hospital is quiet, 3:47 in the morning, the voice, always the same phrase, always in unison, and I know, somewhere above me, they are still speaking. There's a room in this hospital we're never supposed to open. I know why. My name is Marcus Levesque, and I have worked as a critical care nurse at Montreal General Hospital for 9 years. I have cared for patients with every imaginable condition. I have seen bodies fight infections, reject transplants, and shut down from trauma. I understand disease. I understand how the body responds to illness. But I do not understand room 12D. It is an isolation room on the 12th floor, tucked at the end of the east wing. Officially, it is listed as undergoing maintenance. Unofficially, it has been empty for 3 years. No patients are ever assigned to it. No cleaning staff enter. The door stays closed. I first noticed it during my 2nd year on the unit. I was reviewing the bedboard, looking for an open isolation room for a patient with antibiotic-resistant pneumonia. Room 12D showed as available in the system, but when I asked the charge nurse, she shook her head. "Not that one," she said. Use 12F. I asked why. She did not answer. Over the years, I learned to avoid it. Everyone did. We routed around it during rounds. We walked past it without looking. It became part of the architecture, like a support beam or a fire door, invisible. Until November 14th, 2022. We had a surge. Every isolation room was full. Influenza, COVID, bacterial pneumonia. The ICU was at capacity. The charge nurse was scrambling to find space. I watched her scroll through the bedboard, her face tight with stress. "We need another room," she said. I glanced at the screen. Room 12D was still listed as available. What about? No. But we're full. We don't have a choice. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she sighed and nodded. Fine, but chart everything. Every vital sign, every lab, every symptom. Understand? I did not, but I agreed. The patient was a 42-year-old man named David Renault. He had been admitted with fever, chills, and respiratory distress. Chest x-ray showed pneumonia. Blood cultures were pending. He was stable but needed isolation and monitoring. I brought him to room 12D. The room looked normal, standard isolation setup, negative pressure, sealed door, monitoring equipment, IV pole. Everything was clean and functional. There was nothing visibly wrong with it. I hooked him up to the monitors, started an IV, drew blood for labs. He was alert and oriented. Breathing was labored but manageable. Oxygen saturation was 92%. I left to check on another patient. When I came back 20 minutes later, his symptoms had changed. The fever was gone. Respiratory distress was gone. But now he was complaining of severe abdominal pain and nausea. His skin had taken on a grayish tone. His eyes looked sunken. I checked his chart. Nothing had changed in his history. No new medications, no procedures, but his body was responding as if he had an entirely different disease. I called the physician. She ordered new labs and imaging. I drew blood again, started anti-nausea medication, and reassessed vitals. His oxygen saturation was now 98%. Heart rate was normal, but his abdomen was rigid and distended. He looked like a surgical case, not a pneumonia patient. The labs came back an hour later, incompatible with analysis. I stared at the report. I had never seen that phrase before. I called the lab. "What does this mean?" I asked. "It means the sample can't be processed," the tech said. "The blood isn't reacting to any of our reagents. It's like it's not reading as human." "That's impossible." "I know. Send another sample." I did. Same result. By morning, David Renault's symptoms had changed again. The abdominal pain was gone. Now he had a rash across his chest and arms. His temperature spiked to 104. His breathing was shallow. He looked like a different patient entirely. The physician was baffled. She ordered a full workup, infectious disease consult, imaging, toxicology. Everything came back inconclusive or incompatible. "Move him," she finally said. "Get him out of that room." We transferred him to 12F. Within 6 hours, his symptoms stabilized. The rash faded. His fever dropped. His labs came back normal. He was diagnosed with community-acquired pneumonia and discharged 3 days later. Room 12D was closed again. I asked the charge nurse what had happened. She hesitated, then she told me. That room does something to patients, she said quietly. It's been happening for years. Every patient admitted develops identical symptoms. Doesn't matter what they came in with, doesn't matter their history. The room overrides it. That's not possible. I know, but it happens. Why don't we just close it permanently? We tried. Administration renumbered it twice, changed the door, reassigned the space, but it keeps showing up in the system, and every few years, someone uses it. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand a logical explanation, but I had seen it myself. I had watched a pneumonia patient transform into something unrecognizable. I had seen blood samples rejected as incompatible with analysis. I never assigned another patient to room 12D, but sometimes, late at night, I walk past it. The door is always closed, the lights are always off, and I swear I can hear monitors beeping inside. Steady, rhythmic, tracking vitals that should not exist. I do not open the door. I do not look inside, but I know it is waiting. For the next time we run out of space, for the next time someone forgets the rule. Room 12D is always available, and it always takes what it is given. I didn't believe in the dead returning until one of them asked me for help. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I have worked as a pulmonologist at Presbyterian Medical Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico for 12 years. I specialize in tuberculosis treatment and manage one of the few remaining TB wards in the southwestern United States. I have treated hundreds of patients. I have seen the disease in every stage, from latent infection to full respiratory failure. I thought I understood everything about my ward. I was wrong. The incident occurred on March 22nd, 2023. I was covering the night shift alone. We had 4 active TB patients in isolation, all on different treatment protocols. The ward was quiet. Vitals were stable. I was finishing up paperwork at the nurse's station when I heard my own voice. "Check on bed 3, it said. I looked up. The hallway was empty. The intercom was off. But the voice had been clear. It sounded exactly like me. Same pitch, same cadence, same slight rasp I get when I am tired. I stood and walked toward room 3. The patient inside was a 56-year-old man named Thomas Garrett. He had been admitted 2 weeks earlier with multi-drug resistant TB. His condition was improving slowly. He was on a strict medication schedule and required frequent monitoring. I opened the door. He was asleep. His oxygen saturation was stable at 94%. Breathing was regular. Nothing appeared wrong. I returned to the nurse's station. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. "Check on bed 3. My voice, clear and direct, but I had not spoken. I checked the intercom, off. I checked the security footage. The hallway was empty. I was alone on the ward. I walked back to room 3. Thomas was still asleep, still stable. I checked his IV, reviewed his medication log. Everything was in order. When I stepped back into the hallway, I saw the other patients. All of them were standing at their windows, facing outward. Completely still, I felt my pulse quicken. TB patients are often weak and fatigued. Seeing all 4 standing at the same time, in the same position was unusual. I approached room 1. The patient inside did not turn when I entered. She just stood there, her back to me, her hands pressed against the glass. "Mrs. Alvarez?" I said softly. She did not respond. "Mrs. Alvarez, can you hear me?" She turned slowly. Her eyes were open, but unfocused. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. Then she spoke. "Check on bed 3." It was my voice, coming from her mouth, perfectly synchronized with the movement of her lips. I backed out of the room. Room 2, same thing. The patient standing at the window, turning slowly, speaking in my voice. "Check on bed 3." Room 4, identical. Same posture, same words, my voice. I ran to room 3. Thomas was sitting up in bed. His eyes were open. He was staring at me. "You told me to check on you," I said, my voice shaking. "Why?" He did not answer. He just stared. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. The other patients were in the hallway, all 3 of them, walking in perfect unison. Their movements were synchronized. Left foot, right foot, no deviation. They stopped outside room 3, and then they spoke, all at once, my voice, layered and overlapping. "Administer protocol." I did not know what that meant. I have never heard of a protocol by that name. I checked the medication orders. Nothing matched. "What protocol?" I asked. They did not answer. They just stood there, staring at me, their mouths slightly open. I grabbed my phone and called security. No answer. I tried the hospital operator. The line was dead. The lights flickered. I looked up. The fluorescent panels were stuttering on and off, casting the hallway in bursts of harsh light and shadow. In the darkness between flashes, I saw something else. Shapes. Standing behind the patients. Tall, thin, distorted. I closed my eyes, counted to 3, opened them again. The shapes were gone. The patients were walking back to their rooms, slowly, in unison. They climbed into their beds, pulled the blankets up to their chins, closed their eyes. The lights stopped flickering. The hallway was silent. I stood there, shaking, trying to process what I had just seen. I checked the security footage. It showed me standing alone in the hallway. No patients, no movement, just me. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. I reviewed the patient charts. No changes, no new orders, no indication that anything unusual had occurred. I finished my shift in silence. I did not report the incident. I did not tell anyone. The next night, the ward was closed. No explanation. The patients were transferred to other facilities. The isolation rooms were sealed. 2 weeks later, I received a memo. The ward would remain closed indefinitely due to structural concerns. I knew that was not the truth. I requested the security footage from that night. It had been deleted. I asked about the patient transfer records. They were incomplete. I asked the other staff members if they had experienced anything unusual. No one would talk to me. The TB ward is still closed. The doors are locked. The lights are off. But sometimes, late at night, when I am working in another part of the hospital, I hear my own voice, quiet, distant, giving orders I never spoke. "Check on bed 3." And I know, somewhere in that sealed ward, they are still standing at the windows, waiting for the protocol, whatever it is. Everything in the pediatric isolation unit was routine that night until the monitors started tracking a patient who didn't exist. My name is Anna Johansson, and I have worked as a pediatric nurse at Oslo University Hospital for 14 years. I specialize in infectious disease care for children. I have treated measles, meningitis, whooping cough, and every childhood illness that requires isolation and intensive monitoring. I have held crying infants. I have comforted frightened toddlers. I have learned to stay calm when parents are terrified. But I have never been able to explain what happened in bed 7. The isolation unit has 6 beds. 5 are used regularly for patients requiring airborne or contact precautions. The 6th bed, positioned at the far left corner of the room, is different. We call it bed 7, even though it is technically bed 6. The number on the wall says 6. The chart holder says 6, but everyone who works there calls it bed 7 because there should be 7 beds. The layout is wrong. The spacing between the beds suggests room for one more. The electrical outlets are configured for 7 stations. The monitoring system has 7 input ports, but there are only 6 beds. No one knows why. I started working in the unit in 2009. During orientation, the senior nurse showed me the beds, explained the isolation protocols, and then paused when we reached bed 7. "Don't leave children alone near this bed," she said quietly. "Why not?" I asked. "They don't like it." She did not elaborate. I learned the rest over time. Children refused to sleep in bed 7. Even heavily sedated patients would wake up crying if placed there. Toddlers would scream. Older children would beg to be moved. They could not explain why. They just said the bed felt wrong. We stopped using it for patients. It became a storage area for extra blankets and supplies. But we kept the monitoring equipment connected. Hospital policy required all beds to remain functional. That was the mistake. On January 6th, 2023, I was working the night shift. We had 3 patients in isolation: a 5-year-old with influenza in bed 1, a 7-year-old with bacterial meningitis in bed 3, an infant with RSV in bed 5. Bed 7 was empty, as always. At 11:43, the monitor alarm went off. I looked up. The screen showed vitals from bed 7. Heart rate 82, respiratory rate 16, oxygen saturation 97%, blood pressure 100/60, normal pediatric vitals for a patient who did not exist. I walked over to the bed. It was empty. The blankets were folded. The pillow was smooth, but the weight sensor beneath the mattress registered 30 kilograms. I reset the monitor. The alarm stopped. The vitals disappeared. I returned to the nurse's station. 5 minutes later, the alarm went off again. Same vitals, same readings, same weight. I called the biomedical technician. He arrived 20 minutes later, checked the equipment, found no malfunction. "Sensors are working fine," he said. "Maybe something's on the bed?" I showed him. Nothing. He frowned, ran another diagnostic. Everything checked out. "I'll file a report," he said, "but the equipment's functional." He left. The alarm went off again at midnight, and again at 12:15, and again at 12:30. Each time the vitals were consistent. Heart rate, breathing, oxygen, blood pressure, all normal, all tracking a patient who was not there. I muted the alarm. I could not keep resetting it. At 1 in the morning, I was charting at the nurse's station when I heard a sound, humming, soft, melodic, a child's voice. I stood and walked toward the isolation room. The sound was coming from inside. I opened the door. The three patients were asleep. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of monitoring screens. But I could still hear it, the humming, gentle and rhythmic. It was coming from bed 7. I approached slowly. The bed looked empty. The blankets were still folded. The pillow was still smooth, but the mattress was compressed, as if someone was lying on it. I reached out and touched the blanket. It was warm. I pulled my hand back. My pulse was racing. I am a nurse. I do not believe in ghosts. I believe in science and medicine and evidence-based care. But I felt it, body heat, radiating from an empty bed. I stepped back. The humming stopped. The monitor alarm went off again. This time, the vitals were different. Heart rate 120, respiratory rate 32, oxygen saturation 89%. The numbers were climbing, dropping, fluctuating wildly. I watched the screen. The heart rate spiked to 140. The oxygen level dropped to 85. The respiratory rate hit 40. A child in distress, a child who was not there. I should have called the physician. I should have documented everything. But instead, I did what I have done 1,000 times before. I spoke to the patient. "It's okay," I said softly. "You're safe. I'm here." The numbers stabilized. Heart rate topped to 90. Oxygen climbed to 94. Breathing slowed to 20. The monitor beeped steadily, rhythmically, like a lullaby. I stood there for a long time, watching the vitals, listening to the soft electronic tones. Then I felt it, a small hand, resting on top of mine. I looked down. There was nothing there, but I felt it, warm, fragile, real. I did not move. I stayed until the vitals returned to normal, until the weight sensor reset, until the warmth faded from the mattress. At 6 in the morning, the day shift arrived. I handed over care. I said nothing about bed 7, but I know what I felt. I know what I heard. And I know that sometimes, late at night, when the unit is quiet, the monitor still tracks vitals from bed 7, a child who was never admitted, never discharged, never recorded, but always there, always warm, always waiting for someone to notice. If you ever work nights here, don't look directly at the man in the reflection. My name is Dr. Priya Sharma, and I have worked as an emergency medicine physician at Singapore General Hospital for 8 years. I have treated every kind of respiratory emergency: asthma attacks, pulmonary embolisms, anaphylaxis, drowning victims. I have intubated patients in cardiac arrest. I have watched lungs collapse and reinflate. I understand the mechanics of breathing better than most people understand their own names, but I cannot explain what happened in the negative pressure room. We call it Room 8N. It is a specialized isolation room designed for patients with airborne infectious diseases. The ventilation system creates negative pressure, preventing contaminated air from escaping into the hallway. The room has reinforced seals, HEPA filtration, and continuous air monitoring. It is one of the safest rooms in the hospital. Until October 19th, 2022, I was working the overnight shift in the emergency department when a patient arrived with severe respiratory distress. A 34-year-old man named Wei Zhang. He had been found unconscious in his apartment. Paramedics reported labored breathing, cyanosis, and oxygen saturation in the low 80s. We moved him to room 8N immediately. I intubated him, connected him to the ventilator, started oxygen at 100%, drew blood for labs, ordered a chest x-ray. His oxygen saturation climbed to 92%, then 95, then 98, normal. His breathing stabilized. The ventilator cycled smoothly. His color improved. He was sedated and resting comfortably. I stepped out to review his labs. That was when the respiratory therapist called me back. "Dr. Sharma," she said quietly, "you need to see this." I returned to room 8N. Wei Zhang was still intubated, still sedated, but something was wrong. His chest was not moving. The ventilator was cycling. Air was flowing through the tube, but his chest was not rising and falling. It remained still, flat, motionless. "Check the tube placement," I said. The therapist checked. The endotracheal tube was in the correct position, secured properly. Air was moving through it, but his chest did not move. I listened to his lungs with a stethoscope. Clear breath sounds. Bilaterally, air was entering his lungs. I could hear it, but I could not see it. His oxygen saturation remained at 98%. His vital signs were stable. The capnography showed normal carbon dioxide levels. Every monitor indicated that he was breathing normally, but his chest did not rise. "This doesn't make sense," the therapist whispered. I agreed. I ordered an immediate chest x-ray. The portable machine arrived within minutes. We took the image. The lungs were inflated, fully expanded, no collapse, no fluid, no obstruction, but his chest had not moved. I called the ICU attending. He came down immediately. He examined the patient, reviewed the monitors, studied the x-ray. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Everything indicates normal respiratory function, but visually," he trailed off. We stood there, watching. The ventilator cycled, the monitors beeped, the oxygen flowed, and Wei Zhang's chest remained completely still. At 3 in the morning, something changed. His oxygen saturation began to drop, slowly at first. 97, 96, 95. I increased the oxygen concentration. No change. 94, 93, 92. I checked the ventilator settings. Everything was correct. I checked the endotracheal tube. Still in place. 90, 88, 85. His lips turned blue. His skin became dusky. He was desaturating rapidly, but his lungs were still receiving air. The monitors showed adequate ventilation. The capnography was normal. He was suffocating. While breathing, I tried everything. Increased the respiratory rate, adjusted the tidal volume, switched to manual bagging. Nothing worked. 80, 75, 70. His heart rate began to climb. His blood pressure spiked. His body was in distress, but his lungs were functioning. The ICU attending looked at me. "This is impossible." I knew, but it was happening. At 68% oxygen saturation, I made the decision to extubate. If the tube was somehow malfunctioning, removing it might help. I pulled the tube. Wei Zhang gasped. His chest heaved. He took a deep, shuddering breath. His oxygen saturation dropped to 65%. He was breathing on his own. I could see his chest rising and falling. I could hear air moving through his airway, but his oxygen level continued to fall. 60, 55, 50. I placed a non-rebreather mask over his face, cranked the oxygen to 15 liters per minute, 48%. His eyes opened. He looked at me. His mouth moved, forming words I could not hear. He was suffocating, fully conscious, fully aware. I grabbed the crash cart, prepared to reintubate, and then he stopped breathing. His chest went still. His eyes closed. His heart rate began to drop, but his oxygen saturation started to climb. 55, 60, 65. I stared at the monitor. He was not breathing. I could see that clearly. No chest movement, no airflow, no respiratory effort, but his oxygen level was rising. 70, 75, 80. The ICU attending grabbed my arm. Get him out of this room. We moved him immediately, transported him to a standard ICU bed. The moment we crossed the threshold of room 8N, he gasped. His breathing resumed, normal, regular. His oxygen saturation stabilized at 96%. He woke up 3 hours later, confused but stable. He had no memory of what happened. We ran every test imaginable: pulmonary function, cardiac workup, neurology consult. Everything was normal. He was discharged 2 days later with a diagnosis of unexplained respiratory distress. Room 8N was closed immediately. Engineers inspected the ventilation system, found no malfunction. The negative pressure was working correctly. The air filtration was perfect, but the room was never used again. It was converted to storage within 48 hours. I still work at Singapore General. I pass room 8N every shift. The door is sealed, the lights are off. But sometimes I see movement inside, through the small window in the door. A figure standing in the center of the room, chest perfectly still, not breathing, but not dead. I do not look directly at it. I have learned that lesson, because the one time I did, it turned toward me, and I swear I saw my own face, suffocating, behind the glass. I never reported what happened that night, but it still follows me. My name is Dr. Tomasz Novak, and I have worked as an infectious disease specialist at Prague General Hospital for 16 years. I have treated cholera, typhoid, hepatitis, and every bacterial and viral infection that requires strict isolation protocols. I have watched patients recover against impossible odds. I have also watched them die in rooms designed to contain their suffering. I thought I understood the boundaries of disease and death, but I cannot explain the wall in room 4H. The isolation wing was built in 1952 during a tuberculosis epidemic that killed hundreds in the city. The architecture is Soviet-era brutalist. Thick concrete walls, narrow windows, heavy steel doors. The rooms are cold and institutional, designed for function rather than comfort. Room 4H is at the end of the eastern corridor. It has been in continuous use for 70 years. Thousands of patients have been treated there. But in 2019, we stopped admitting patients to that room. Not because of structural damage, not because of outdated equipment, because of the wall, the western wall specifically, the one opposite the window. It is bare concrete, painted institutional white. No decorations, no medical equipment mounted on it, just a flat, empty surface. Until the handprints appeared, I first noticed them on August 4th, 2019. I was doing evening rounds, checking on a patient with antibiotic resistant pneumonia in room 4G. I happened to glance through the window of room 4H as I passed. The room was empty. It had been empty for 2 days, awaiting a deep clean after the previous patient was discharged. But I saw handprints on the western wall, small, child-sized, pressed against the concrete, as if someone had stood there with palms flat against the surface. I assumed the cleaning staff had left marks. I made a note to have it cleaned again. The next morning, there were more, not just a few, dozens, covering the entire wall from floor to ceiling, all the same size, all pressed in the same position, palms flat, fingers spread. I called maintenance. They scrubbed the wall, repainted it, sealed it with fresh white paint. The handprints reappeared within 24 hours. This time, they were not on the surface. They were under the paint. Raised impressions pushing through from behind the wall as if someone had pressed their hands against wet concrete and left permanent indentations. But the wall was 70 years old. The concrete had been cured for decades. I ordered the wall inspected. Engineers drilled core samples. Samples ran structural analysis, found nothing unusual. The concrete was solid, no voids, no cavities, no evidence of tampering, but the handprints remained. We closed room 4H temporarily. I requested a full historical review of the room. What I found disturbed me. In 1952, during the tuberculosis outbreak, room 4H had been used as a pediatric isolation ward. Children with advanced TB were quarantined there, often for months at a time. Medical records from that era were incomplete, but I found scattered references to high mortality rates. More than 60 children died in that room between 1952 and 1955. Most were under the age of 10. I reported my findings to administration. They authorized further investigation. We brought in a forensic team to analyze the handprints. The chemical analysis came back 3 weeks later. The impressions contained biological material, tissue residue, skin cells. But the DNA was degraded beyond identification. What we could determine was the age of the material, 70 years old. The handprints were not recent. They had been there since the wall was built, sealed inside the concrete, invisible for decades, until now. I do not know why they surfaced. I do not know what changed, but I know they are growing. Every week there are more, not just on the western wall. Now they appear on the ceiling, on the floor, on the door, always the same size, always child-sized. We tried to seal the room completely, locked the door, covered the window, stopped all access, but staff began reporting sounds, knocking, soft and rhythmic, coming from inside room 4H, always at night, always between 2 and 4 in the morning, Security footage showed nothing. The room remained empty, but the knocking continued. I was assigned to investigate. I entered the room alone at 2:30 in the morning on November 12th, 2022. The handprints covered every surface: walls, ceiling, floor, door, hundreds of them, overlapping, layered. I stood in the center of the room and listened. The knocking started at 2:47, not from the walls, from inside the walls, deep, muffled, as if something was trapped within the concrete, trying to get out. I placed my hand against the western wall. It was warm, not room temperature, body temperature. I pulled my hand away. My palm left a mark, a temporary impression in the paint. And then, slowly, the wall began to respond. A new handprint formed next to mine, small, child-sized, pressing outward from the inside. I watched as it emerged, fingers spreading, palm flattening. The concrete bulged slightly, as if something was pushing against it from behind. I stepped back. My heart was pounding. I am a physician. I do not believe in ghosts. I believe in pathology and microbiology and evidence-based medicine, but I was watching something impossible. The handprint pressed harder. The concrete cracked. A thin fissure appeared, running vertically along the wall. I heard a sound, faint, muffled, coming from the crack, breathing, shallow and rapid, the breathing of a child. I ran from the room. I sealed the door behind me. I filed a report recommending permanent closure. Room 4H was decommissioned the following week. The door was welded shut. The ventilation system was disconnected. The room was removed from all hospital records. But I still hear it sometimes, late at night, when the hospital is quiet, knocking, soft and rhythmic, coming from the fourth floor, and I know they are still there, 70 years later, still pressing their hands against the wall, still trying to be seen, still waiting for someone to let them out. There's a room in this hospital we're never supposed to open. I know why. My name is Dr. Juliana Costa, and I have worked as a neurologist at Hospital das Clínicas in São Paulo for 13 years. I specialize in meningitis and encephalitis cases, treating patients whose infections have crossed into the central nervous system. I have seen brain swelling, seizures, coma, and every neurological complication that bacterial and viral meningitis can produce. I have learned to recognize the signs of deterioration, the subtle changes in consciousness, the progression from confusion to unresponsiveness. But I have never encountered anything like ward silence. That is not its official name. Officially, it is the fourth floor meningitis unit. But everyone who works there calls it ward silence, because after midnight, sound stops working. Not gradually, not in waves. At exactly midnight, all sound within the ward ceases to exist. Alarms do not ring, monitors do not beep, footsteps produce no echo, voices make no vibration. You can scream at the top of your lungs and hear nothing. You can drop a metal tray and it lands in absolute silence. The effect is localized. Step outside the ward and sound returns immediately. But inside, from midnight until 6 in the morning, there is only silence. I learned about it during my first night shift in 2010. I was charting at the nurse's station when I noticed the clock approaching midnight. The other nurse, an older woman named Helena, was packing up her supplies. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Leaving the ward," she said quietly. "You should too." "Why? We have patients." She looked at me for a long moment. "You will see." At 11:59, the ward was normal. Monitors beeped, ventilators cycled, the intercom crackled with static. I could hear my own breathing, the rustle of papers, the hum of fluorescent lights. At midnight, it stopped. Everything, all at once. I looked up from my chart. The monitors were still functioning. I could see the waveforms moving across the screens: heart rates, respiratory patterns, oxygen saturation, all normal, but I could not hear them. I stood and walked to the nearest patient room, a 12-year-old girl with bacterial meningitis. She was sedated and intubated. The ventilator was cycling. I could see her chest rising and falling, but the machine made no sound. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I clapped my hands. Silence. I stepped back into the hallway and screamed. My throat vibrated. I felt the air leave my lungs, but I heard nothing. I ran to the ward entrance and crossed the threshold. Sound returned instantly. The sudden noise was overwhelming. Alarms from other floors, distant conversations, the mechanical hum of hospital equipment. I stepped back into the ward. Silence. I did this 3 times, in and out, sound and silence. The boundary was exact, precise. Helena was waiting for me outside. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No one knows," she said. "It has been happening for years, since before I started working here. Why doesn't anyone report it?" They did. Engineers inspected everything. Acoustics experts came. Physicists tested the space. They found nothing wrong. The sound waves are there. Instruments can detect them. Recording equipment picks them up, but human ears cannot hear them. That's impossible. I know. I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand explanations. But I had experienced it myself. I had stood in that ward and screamed into absolute silence. Over the years, I adapted. I learned to work during the silent hours. I relied on visual cues, watched monitors instead of listening to alarms, observed patients instead of hearing them breathe. But the silence affects people. New staff members panic. They become disoriented. Some refuse to work night shifts after experiencing it. Others request transfers. Patients react differently. Those who are conscious during the silent hours become agitated. They press call buttons that make no sound. They try to speak and hear nothing. Some become convinced they have gone deaf. Others believe they are dying. We sedate them if possible. But not all patients can be sedated. On March 8th, 2022, we admitted a 17-year-old boy named Raphael. He had viral meningitis. Mild case. He was conscious and alert, expected to recover fully. He was admitted at 10 in the evening. I explained his diagnosis, started treatment, and told him to rest. He was nervous but cooperative. At midnight, the silence began. I was at the nurse's station, monitoring his vitals remotely. Everything looked stable. Heart rate normal, oxygen good, no signs of distress. Then I saw him sit up in bed. I walked to his room. He was staring at the window, his mouth open. He was speaking, but I could not hear him. I approached slowly. His eyes were wide. His hands were shaking. He pointed toward the window. I looked, saw nothing, just darkness and the city lights beyond. He kept pointing, kept speaking. His lips moved rapidly, frantically. I tried to calm him, placed my hand on his shoulder, gestured for him to lie down. He pushed me away, stood up, walked toward the window, pressed his face against the glass. And then he started screaming. I could see it. His mouth stretched wide, his body convulsing with the force of it. But I heard nothing. I grabbed him, tried to pull him back. He fought me, stronger than he should have been. He clawed at the window, slammed his fists against the glass. I called for help, pressed the emergency button. No alarm sounded. I ran into the hallway, waved frantically at the other nurse. She saw me and came running. Together, we restrained Raphael, sedated him, strapped him to the bed. He thrashed for 10 minutes, then went still. His eyes remained open, staring at the window. At 6 in the morning, sound returned. The monitors beeped, the ventilators hummed. The alarm I had pressed hours earlier finally rang, loud and piercing. Raphael was transferred to psychiatric evaluation. He would not speak, would not eat, just stared straight ahead, his eyes unfocused. He was discharged 2 weeks later. Physically recovered, mentally shattered, I requested his medical records months later. They were sealed. Ward silence is still operational. We still treat meningitis patients there. We still work through the silent hours, but we do not leave patients conscious after midnight. Because I know what Raphael saw, I know what made him scream. I saw it too, just once, reflected in the window glass during the silent hours. Figures, standing in the room, dozens of them, crowded together, staring at the patients. They do not move, they do not speak, they just watch. And when sound returns at 6 in the morning, they are gone. But I know they are still there, waiting in the silence, watching, always watching. Everything in the fever ward was routine that night, until the monitors started tracking a patient who didn't exist. My name is Dr. Malcolm Fraser, and I have worked as an internal medicine physician at Glasgow Royal Infirmary for 19 years. I specialize in infectious, febrile illnesses, treating patients with unexplained fevers, tropical diseases, and complex diagnostic cases. I have seen temperatures spike to dangerous levels. I have watched patients deteriorate from sepsis. I have learned to interpret fever patterns as a language the body uses to communicate distress. But I have never seen a temperature chart continue after discharge. The patient was a 48-year-old woman named Catherine McLeod. She was admitted on September 3rd, 2022, with fever of unknown origin. Temperature on admission was 39.2 degrees Celsius. Standard workup revealed nothing. Blood cultures negative, imaging unremarkable. No obvious source of infection. We started empiric antibiotics and monitored her closely. Her temperature fluctuated over the next 5 days, sometimes dropping to normal, sometimes spiking to 40 degrees. The pattern was erratic, unpredictable. On September 8th, her fever broke. Temperature stabilized at 37 degrees. She felt better. Labs improved. We discharged her with outpatient follow-up. I closed her chart, marked her as discharged in the system. That should have been the end. 2 days later, I was reviewing patient data when I noticed something unusual. Catherine McLeod's temperature chart was still updating. I opened the file. Her vitals continued to populate in the electronic medical record. Temperature readings, time stamped, current, 37.3 degrees at 1400 hours. She had been discharged 48 hours earlier. She was not in the hospital. She had no monitoring equipment at home. I assumed it was a system glitch. I contacted IT. They checked the database, found no errors. The temperature readings were genuine entries, not duplicates or cached data. Someone must be manually entering them, the technician said. I checked the access logs. No manual entries. The data was being recorded automatically, as if Catherine were still connected to a monitoring system. I called her mobile phone. She answered on the third ring. Mrs. McLeod, this is Dr. Fraser. How are you feeling? Much better, thank you. The fever hasn't returned. Have you been monitoring your temperature at home? No. Should I be? No. Just routine follow-up. Thank you. I hung up, stared at the screen. Her temperature chart updated again, 37.5 degrees at 1530 hours. I reported it to my supervisor. She reviewed the chart, saw the same thing. We decided to monitor it, document the anomaly, wait for IT to resolve the issue. The temperature readings continued, every few hours, steadily climbing, 37.8 degrees. 30.1 degrees, 38.4 degrees. After 1 week, the readings showed a clear upward trend. I called Catherine again. Have you been feeling unwell? No, I feel fine. Why? Just checking in. Let me know if the fever returns. I will. Her chart showed 38.9 degrees. I consulted with Infectious disease. They recommended bringing her back for evaluation. I scheduled an appointment. She came in Polozo 3 days later. Physical exam was normal. Temperature was 37.1 degrees, perfectly normal, but her chart showed 39.6 degrees at the exact time I examined her. I showed her the screen. Do you see this temperature reading? She nodded. 39.6, but I feel fine. The system says your temperature is that high, but the thermometer I just used says otherwise. She looked confused. Which one is right? I did not know. Over the next 2 months, the chart temperature continued to rise. 40 degrees, 42 degrees, 45 degrees, readings that should have been fatal, but Catherine remained healthy. No symptoms, no fever, no distress. It could not explain it. Engineers inspected the system, found no malfunction. The database was functioning correctly. The readings were genuine, but they did not correspond to reality. On November 16th, the chart temperature reached 100 degrees Celsius. Boiling point. I called Catherine immediately. Are you all right? Yes. Why? Has something happened? Your chart shows a temperature of 100 degrees. She laughed. That is impossible. I would be dead. I know. The readings continued to climb. 105 degrees, 110, 115. At 118 degrees Fahrenheit, I received an alert. The system flagged the reading as incompatible with life. Automatic protocols triggered. Emergency response activated. I canceled the alert, explained that the patient was not in the hospital, not in distress. The system did not care. It registered the temperature as real, critical, fatal on December 1st, 2022. The chart reading reached 118.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it stopped updating. No new readings, no timestamps. The chart simply froze at that exact temperature. I tried to access the file. It would not open. System error. Access denied. I contacted IT. They attempted to retrieve the chart. The file was corrupted, unreadable. All data from Catherine McLeod's admission had been erased. No discharge summary, no lab results, no temperature readings, nothing. The system had no record of her admission. I called Catherine. The number was disconnected. I checked her address. The flat was vacant. The landlord said she had moved out months earlier. No forwarding address. I searched for her in the National Health Database. No records, no registration, no patient history. Catherine McLeod did not exist. I reviewed my own notes. The handwritten charts I kept during her admission. They were blank. Pages filled with my handwriting, but the ink had faded completely, as if the words had evaporated. I asked the nurses who had cared for her. They did not remember her. I showed them the bed she had occupied. They said it had been empty during that period. I was the only person who remembered Catherine McLeod, and I have no proof she was ever here, but I still check the system. Late at night, when the ward is quiet, I search for her name, her medical record number, anything. Sometimes the system glitches. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, her chart appears, and the temperature reading is still there. 118.4 degrees, still climbing, still burning, even though she is gone. I didn't believe in the dead returning until one of them asked me for help. My name is Dr. Jennifer Okonkwo, and I have worked as an epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta for 11 years. I specialize in high-consequence pathogens, working in biosafety level 4 containment facilities with some of the deadliest viruses known to science. Ebola, Marburg, Lassa fever. I have trained extensively in biocontainment protocols. I understand the engineering behind airlocks, negative pressure systems, and decontamination procedures. I thought I understood every aspect of Isolation 12. I was wrong. Isolation 12 is a specialized biocontainment room in the CDC's main facility. It is designed to house patients infected with Category A biological agents. The room maintains strict negative pressure. Access is controlled through a 3-stage airlock system. Entry and exit require biometric identification and full protective equipment. The airlock protocol is simple. Scan your badge. Wait for the first door to seal. Scan again. Wait for the second door to open. One person at a time. Never deviate. But the system logs 3 people, always 3. I first noticed the anomaly in January 2023. I was reviewing access logs for a routine audit. Isolation. 12 had been used 3 times that month for training exercises. No live pathogens, just protocol drills. Each entry showed the same pattern. Technician enters airlock. Badge scan registers. Door 1 opens. Door 1 closes. Badge scan registers. Door 2 opens. But the weight sensors showed three people, not in sequence, simultaneously. The moment the technician entered the airlock, the sensors detected three distinct masses, three separate pressure points, three bodies occupying the same space. I assumed sensor malfunction. I filed a maintenance request. Engineers inspected the system, calibrated the sensors, ran diagnostics. Everything checked out. The sensors were functioning correctly. Maybe it's detecting the air pressure differential, one engineer suggested. Air doesn't weigh that much, I replied. Then I don't know what to tell you. The pattern continued. Every entry into isolation 12, every exit. Three people registered on the sensors, but only one person was ever visible. I decided to test it myself. On February 9th, I suited up in full protective gear, entered the airlock alone, scanned my badge. The first door sealed behind me. I stood in the small chamber, waiting for the second door to release. The air felt heavy, pressurized, like standing at the bottom of a swimming pool. I looked at the sensor display, three contacts, three distinct weights. I was alone. I could see every surface of the airlock, white walls, sealed floor, single overhead light. No one else was present, but I felt crowded, like standing in an elevator with two other people pressed against me. I could feel their proximity, their presence. I spun around, checked every corner. The airlock was empty. The second door opened. I stepped into isolation 12. The feeling dissipated. I was alone again. I reviewed the security footage later. It showed me entering the airlock, standing still, turning in a circle, then proceeding into the containment room. No one else appeared on camera, but the weight sensors were undeniable. Three people every single time. I reported my findings to the facility director. He reviewed the data, consulted with the engineering team, authorized a full investigation. Forensic analysis began. They examined the airlock structure, checked for hidden compartments, scanned for electromagnetic interference, found nothing. Then they checked the historical records. Isolation 12 was commissioned in 1987. It had been used for hundreds of containment procedures, thousands of entries and exits. The logs went back decades, and the pattern was there from the beginning. Three people, always three, since the day the room became operational. The investigative team expanded their search. They reviewed incident reports, personnel files, medical records. They found three deaths, all in 1992, all within 6 months, all connected to Isolation 12. Two researchers and one technician. They were working on a classified pathogen. Details were redacted, but the outcome was clear. All three became infected. All three were treated in Isolation 12. All three died. Their bodies were cremated immediately. Standard protocol for high risk pathogens. No autopsies, no burial, just incineration and disposal. I requested their personnel files, found photographs, names, faces. Dr. Richard Moss, age 34, virologist. Dr. Sarah Lindholm, age 41, immunologist. Marcus Green, age 28, laboratory technician. Three people dead for 31 years. I compared the weight sensor data to their recorded body masses, exact matches. The sensors were detecting their precise weights as they were in life. The facility director ordered the airlock protocol changed. No more single person entry. New procedure required visual confirmation before proceeding, additional safety checks, but it did not change the sensor readings. 3 people, always 3. I continued my work, tried to ignore it, pretended it was just a technical anomaly, but I felt them every time I entered the airlock, crowded, pressed close, watching. On June 3rd, 2023, I was conducting a late night equipment check. I entered Isolation 12 alone. The facility was nearly empty. Skeleton crew on overnight duty. I stepped into the airlock, scanned my badge. The first door sealed. The air pressure changed. Heavier than usual, the feeling of crowding intensified. I stood still, waiting for the second door. Then I heard it. A voice, faint, muffled, coming from right beside me. Help us. I froze. My pulse spiked. I turned slowly. The airlock was empty, but I heard it again. Help us. We're still here. Female voice, clear, desperate. I wanted to run. I wanted to abort the entry, but the protocol had already started. The doors would not open until the cycle completed. Please, the voice whispered. We can't leave. The second door opened. I stumbled into Isolation 12, ripped off my respirator, gasped for air. Security found me 20 minutes later, sitting on the floor, shaking. I filed a report, requested psychological evaluation, took medical leave. But I still hear them sometimes, late at night, when I am alone in quiet spaces, 3 voices overlapping, asking for help, isolation. 12 is still operational. The airlock still registers 3 people. The protocol was never changed back because deep down, everyone knows. The sensors are not malfunctioning. They are still there. Dr. Moss, Dr. Lindholm, Marcus Green, trapped in the airlock, unable to leave, unable to die, just waiting for someone to let them out or for someone else to join them. If you ever work nights here, don't look directly at the man in the reflection. My name is Dr. Arjun Patel, and I have worked as an infectious disease physician at Medical College Hospital in Kolkata for 15 years. I specialize in cholera treatment and outbreak management, working in one of the few dedicated cholera wards still operating in India. I have treated the thousands of patients. I have seen dehydration so severe that patients lose consciousness within hours. I have watched the disease drain life from bodies faster than we can replace fluids. I thought I had seen every manifestation of suffering that cholera could produce, but I had never heard patients count. The cholera ward occupies the 3rd floor of the eastern wing. It is an old building, constructed during British colonial rule, high ceilings, large windows, thick walls designed to stay cool in the summer heat. The ward holds 20 beds, arranged in 2 rows facing each other. We treat acute cases. Most patients recover within days with proper rehydration. Some do not. The mortality rate is low now, but in severe outbreaks, we lose people. Elderly patients, children, those who arrive too late. On August 7th, 2003, we admitted a 52-year-old man named Rajesh Kumar. Severe cholera, profuse watery diarrhea, extreme dehydration. We started aggressive IV rehydration immediately. He was conscious but weak. He began counting an hour after admission, softly at first, under his breath, numbers in descending order, starting from 8,462, 8,462, 8,461, 8,460. I asked him what he was counting. He did not respond, just kept counting. His eyes were open, but unfocused. I assumed it was delirium. Cholera can cause electrolyte imbalances that affect mental status. I adjusted his fluids, monitored his sodium and potassium levels. The counting continued all night, steady, mechanical, descending. By morning, he had reached 7,912. His physical condition improved. Diarrhea decreased, hydration stabilized, but he never stopped counting. We ran neurological tests. EEG, CT scan, everything came back normal. No structural abnormalities, no seizure activity, just a man counting backward for no apparent reason. On day 3, another patient began counting, a 28-year-old woman, different bed, different admission time, different background, but the same numbers. She started exactly where Rajesh had left off, continuing the sequence as if they were sharing the same countdown. I reported it to my supervisor. She reviewed both cases, found no connection between the patients, different neighborhoods, different exposure sources, no shared contacts, but they counted together in perfect synchronization. When Rajesh paused to drink water, the woman continued. When she slept, Rajesh picked up the sequence. The countdown never stopped. By day 5, 4 patients were counting, all in the cholera ward, all following the same descending sequence. By day 7, 12 patients, more than half the ward. They counted in shifts, overlapping, creating a constant murmur of numbers: 7,218, 7,217, 7,216. Staff began to feel uneasy. The counting was relentless, unchanging. We could not stop it. We could not explain it. I researched the numbers, tried to find significance, dates, coordinates, historical events. Nothing matched. On day 9, a patient recovered and was discharged, but he continued counting at home. His family brought him back 3 days later, still counting, unable to stop. We isolated him, tried sedation. The counting continued even while he slept, mumbled through unconsciousness, automatic, unstoppable. On day 12, a nurse collapsed during her shift. When she regained consciousness, she was counting 7,043, 7,042. She had not been a patient. She had no exposure to the disease, but she was part of the countdown. Panic spread through the hospital. Staff refused to enter the cholera ward. Administration called in specialists, psychiatrists, neurologists, infectious disease experts from other cities. No one could explain it. On day 15, the countdown reached 6,500. I noticed a pattern in the numbers, sequences that looked familiar. I ran them through cryptographic databases, financial systems, scientific formulas. They match classified data, launch codes, banking access sequences, military coordinates, information that should not exist outside secure government systems. How did cholera patients know these numbers? How were they reciting classified information? I reported my findings. The government responded immediately. Military personnel arrived. The ward was quarantined. All patients were isolated. Recording equipment was confiscated. I was interrogated for 6 hours, asked what I knew, what I had shared, who I had told. I told them the truth. The patients were counting. I did not know why. I did not know how. They sealed the ward, removed all patients, transferred them to undisclosed locations. The counting stopped appearing in medical records. All documentation was classified. The cholera ward was demolished in 2003. The entire third floor was gutted, rebuilt, renumbered, but I still hear it sometimes. Late at night, walking past the reconstructed wing, counting, faint, distant, descending, I checked the numbers recently, cross referenced what I remember with current data. Some of the sequences the patients recited were launch codes that were changed years later, coordinates for military installations that were classified until 2010, banking protocols that were not implemented until 2015. The patients were not reciting existing information. They were counting down to future events, data that did not yet exist. I do not know how. I do not know why. But I know the countdown has not stopped. It is still happening somewhere, in someone, and I know it is approaching zero because last week I woke up counting 6,112, 6,111. I tried to stop. I cannot. The numbers keep coming, automatic, unstoppable, descending towards something I do not want to see. 6,097, 6,096. When it reaches zero, something will happen, something we were never supposed to know, something the patients were trying to warn us about, or something they were counting down to. 6,073, 6,072. I am still counting, and I cannot stop. I never reported what happened that night, but it still follows me. My name is Dr. Thabo Mwangi, and I have worked as an infectious disease specialist at Charlotte Maxike Johannesburg Academic Hospital for 22 years. I have treated HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and every tropical disease that crosses into South Africa's borders. I have worked through the Ebola preparedness drills. I have managed isolation protocols during the outbreak scares. I have seen death in many forms, but I have never seen the dead appear in mirrors while their beds remain empty. The Ebola Isolation Unit was established in 2014 during the West African outbreak. We never treated an actual case in Johannesburg, but the unit remained operational, ready, waiting. The rooms are equipped with negative pressure, sealed airlocks, and strict decontamination protocols. Each room has a large observation window, and each window, when the lights are positioned correctly, acts as a mirror. I first noticed the anomaly on March 17th, 2021. I was conducting a routine inspection of the isolation unit. All rooms were empty. The facility was clean and maintained but unused. I walked past room 4, glanced at the observation window, saw a patient in the bed. I stopped, looked again. The reflection showed a man lying in the isolation bed, middle-aged, thin, hospital gown, connected to monitors. But when I looked directly into the room, the bed was empty. I stepped closer to the window. The reflection persisted, clear, detailed. The man's chest was rising and falling. His eyes were closed. He appeared to be sleeping. I opened the door, entered the room. The bed was empty. Sheets were folded. Pillows were stacked. No one had been there. I returned to the hallway, looked at the window again. The man was still there, still sleeping, still breathing. I took a photograph. When I reviewed it later, the image showed an empty bed. But standing in that hallway, looking at that window, I saw him clearly. I reported it to maintenance. They inspected the window, found nothing unusual, standard safety glass, no distortions, no defects. Maybe it is a reflection from another room, the technician suggested. There are no other rooms at this angle, I replied. He shrugged. Then I do not know. I began documenting the phenomenon. Each day, I walked past room 4. Each day, I saw someone in the reflection, not always the same person, different patients, different ages, different positions. Sometimes they were sleeping, sometimes they were sitting up, sometimes they were staring directly at me. But the room remained empty. I started taking notes, descriptions of each patient I saw, age, gender, physical characteristics. I recorded dozens of observations over 3 months. Then I began searching hospital records. I matched the descriptions to death records. Patients who had died in the hospital over the past 40 years. The correlations were undeniable. Every face I saw in the reflection matched a deceased patient. Room 4 had never been used for Ebola, but it had been used for other isolation cases. AIDS patients in the 1990s, tuberculosis patients in the 2000s, infectious diseases that required quarantine and often resulted in death. I cross-referenced my observations with death records, found exact matches, dates, names, causes of death. The reflections showed patients who had died in that room, or in rooms that had occupied that space before the renovation, ghosts, echoes, imprints left behind. I tried to rationalize it, optical illusions, stress, fatigue, but the pattern was too consistent, too specific. On June 4th, 2021, I saw someone I recognized, Dr. Naledi Kumalo. She had been my colleague, a brilliant physician. She died in 2019 from complications of HIV. She had contracted it occupationally, needle stick injury during an emergency procedure. She was treated in the isolation unit, room 4. She died there after 3 weeks of declining health. I saw her reflection in the window. She was sitting up in bed, looking directly at me. Her mouth was moving, as if she was speaking. I could not hear her, but I could read her lips. Help me. I froze. My heart was pounding. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay, to watch, to understand. She kept repeating it. Help me, help me, help me. I opened the door, entered the room, called her name. Naledi? The room was empty, silent, but when I turned to leave, I saw her in the window glass of the door, standing right behind me. I spun around. Nothing there. I looked back at the door window. She was closer now, inches from the glass. Her hand was raised, pressed against the surface from the inside. I ran from the room, did not look back, did not stop until I reached the main corridor. I filed a request to seal room 4. Administration denied it. The room was functional, needed for potential outbreak response. There was no justification for closure based on alleged visual anomalies. But they did allow me to conduct a formal investigation. I brought in colleagues, showed them the reflections. Some saw nothing. Some saw exactly what I saw. Patients in beds, faces pressed against glass, hands reaching out. We photographed the windows from every angle. Some images showed nothing, some showed figures, translucent, overlapping, dozens of them, crowded into a single room. We compared the faces to death records, identified 23 individuals. All had died in the isolation unit, all within the past 40 years, all from infectious diseases. The investigation was quietly closed. The findings were classified. Room 4 remained operational. But I still walk past it, every shift, every day, and I still see them more than I saw before, dozens now, crowded together, staring out at me. Some are standing at the window, some are lying in beds that do not exist, are reaching toward the glass, trying to get out. And I know why. They are not haunting the room, they are trapped in it, sealed behind the reflections, unable to leave, unable to move on. Because isolation does not end with death. For some, it continues forever. I see Naledi sometimes. She is always at the front, always mouthing the same words. Help me. But I cannot. I do not know how to free them. I do not know how to break the reflection. So they remain, visible only in glass, invisible in reality, caught between worlds. And every day there are more. There's a room in this hospital we're never supposed to open. I know why. My name is Dr. Elena Santos, and I have worked as a pulmonologist at Manila General Hospital for 18 years. I specialize in respiratory diseases, treating patients with pneumonia, tuberculosis, asthma, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I have listened to thousands of lungs. I have learned to recognize the subtle sounds of breathing, the wheeze of constricted airways, the crackle of fluid in the alveoli, the quiet rasp of damaged tissue. I know what breathing sounds like in all its variations, in sickness and in health, but I have never heard a floor breathe. The quarantine wing is located on the 7th floor of the East Building. It was constructed in 1968. The architecture is utilitarian. Concrete floors, white walls, fluorescent lighting. The rooms are small and windowless, designed for isolation rather than comfort. Room 7C has been problematic since I started working here. Patients complain about it. They report feeling uncomfortable, anxious, short of breath, even when their oxygen saturation is normal. We assumed it was psychological. Isolation can be stressful. Small spaces can trigger claustrophobia. We tried to reassure patients, adjust medications, provide sedation when necessary, but the complaints continued, consistent, specific, always the same room. On April 9th, 2022, I was assigned to evaluate a patient in room 7C, a 63-year-old woman named Maria Reyes. She had bacterial pneumonia, stable condition, responding well to antibiotics, but she refused to stay in the room. The floor is moving, she told me. It is breathing. I examined her. No fever, no confusion. Mental status was clear. She was not delirious. The floor cannot breathe, I said gently. Look at it, she insisted. Watch it closely. I looked down. The linoleum floor was standard institutional gray, slightly worn, clean, nothing unusual. I watched for 30 seconds, saw nothing. Then I saw it. A slight movement, almost imperceptible. The floor was rising and falling, slowly, rhythmically, like the chest of a sleeping patient. I knelt down, placed my hand flat against the floor, felt it. The surface was moving, up and down, gentle, steady, breathing. I stood quickly, checked the room for ventilation issues, air pressure differentials, structural settling, found no obvious explanation. I called engineering. They inspected the room, checked the foundation, scanned for voids beneath the floor, found nothing structural. The building is solid, the engineer said. No movement, no settling, no issues. But I felt it, and the patient felt it. The floor was breathing. I moved Maria to a different room. She stabilized immediately. No further complaints. I reported the incident. Administration authorized an investigation. Structural engineers conducted a full assessment. Ground penetrating radar scanned beneath room 7C. They found a hollow space, 6 meters below the floor, roughly 3 meters in diameter, not shown on any building plans. No access point, no ventilation, just empty space where none should exist. The engineers could not explain it. The hospital was built on solid ground. No caves, no tunnels, no natural voids. The hollow space should not exist. But it was there, detectable, measurable, real. I requested historical records, found references to the original construction. In 1968, the site had been a cemetery, a small burial ground for unclaimed bodies, mostly indigent patients who died in the old hospital. The cemetery was relocated when construction began. Bodies were exhumed and moved to a municipal site. Official records confirmed the relocation was completed, but ground penetrating radar showed something else. The hollow space beneath room 7C was not empty. It contained dense material, organic, arranged in patterns consistent with human remains. Bodies, still buried, forgotten, left behind. When the cemetery was cleared, I reported the findings. Administration contacted city officials. Forensic archaeologists were brought in. They prepared to excavate, but before excavation could begin, something changed. Patients in room 7C began synchronizing their breathing with the floor. Unconsciously, automatically, their respiratory rate would match the rise and fall of the linoleum. Slow, deep, rhythmic, even patients on ventilators. The machines would adjust, cycling in perfect synchronization with the floor, as if the room was controlling their breathing. Medical staff reported feeling short of breath when entering the room, needing to gasp for air, as if the room was consuming oxygen faster than it could be replaced. We sealed the room, closed it to patients, locked the door, waited for excavation to proceed, but the phenomenon spread. Room 7B, Room 7D, rooms on either side of 7C. The floors began moving, breathing, expanding the rhythm outward. Patients in those rooms reported the same symptoms: breathlessness, synchronization, the feeling of being controlled. Excavation began on May 3rd, 2022. Archaeologists breached the floor of room 7C, dug down 6 meters, reached the hollow space. They found 17 bodies, skeletal remains, still in coffins, arranged in a circular pattern around a central point. The central point was empty. No coffin, no remains, just a depression in the earth, shaped like a human body, as if someone had been there and left an impression. The depression was warm, body temperature, rising and falling with the breathing rhythm. The excavation team withdrew, refused to continue. The site was documented, photographed, sealed. The bodies were left in place. The floor was restored. Room 7C was permanently closed. But the breathing did not stop. It continued, spreading slowly through the seventh floor, one room at a time, following the pattern of the sumik's buried bodies below. We evacuated the quarantine wing, moved all patients to other floors, sealed the entire seventh floor, posted warning signs, restricted access. I still work at Manila General, but I avoid the seventh floor. Everyone does. The doors remain locked, the lights stay off. But at night, when the hospital is quiet, you can hear it. If you stand near the stairwell, if you listen carefully, breathing, deep and rhythmic, coming from behind the sealed doors, the entire floor rising and falling in unison, synchronized with something buried below, something that was supposed to be moved, supposed to be relocated, supposed to be gone, but it is still there, still breathing, still waiting, and every night, the rhythm grows stronger. Everything in the AIDS ward was routine that night until the monitors started tracking a patient who didn't exist. My name is Dr. Rebecca Chen, and I have worked as an infectious disease physician at San Francisco General Hospital for 27 years. I began my career during the height of the AIDS epidemic in the 1990s. I have treated the thousands of patients. I have watched the disease evolve from a death sentence to a manageable chronic condition. I have witnessed medical history, but I cannot explain the face that keeps appearing in our ward. The AIDS unit occupies the fifth floor of Building 5. It has been in continuous operation since 1983. The walls hold decades of memory, grief, loss, survival. The rooms have seen more death than any other ward in the hospital. But they have also seen something else, something that defies medical explanation. The first report came in 1987. A nurse noticed a patient in bed 12 who was not listed in the admission records. Middle-aged man, thin, gaunt, Kaposi's sarcoma lesions visible on his face and arms. Classic late-stage AIDS presentation. She approached the bed. The patient was asleep. She checked his wristband. No name, no medical record number, just blank plastic. She called for the charge nurse. By the time they returned, the bed was empty. The sheets were cold, no impression on the mattress, as if no one had been there. The nurse filed a report. Administration investigated, found no record of admission, no paperwork, no registration. The incident was dismissed as fatigue or stress. But it happened again. Different nurse, different shift, same patient, same bed, same appearance, and again and again. Over the years, dozens of staff members reported seeing him, always in different beds, always sleeping, always vanishing when approached. We started calling him the rotation patient because he moved through the ward like he was being transferred, bed to bed, room to room, never staying long, never leaving a trace. I first saw him in 2004. I was doing morning rounds. Bed 7 was supposed to be empty, awaiting a new admission, but I saw someone lying there, covered with a thin blanket, face turned toward the wall. I approached quietly, did not want to startle him. "Excuse me," I said softly. "Can you tell me your name?" He did not respond. I touched his shoulder gently. He rolled over. I recognized his face immediately, even though I had never met him. The distinctive lesions, the sunken cheeks, the exhausted eyes. I had seen photographs in the staff room, drawn by nurses who had encountered him, descriptions that matched perfectly. He looked at me. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then he was gone. The bed was empty. The blanket was folded. The pillow was smooth, as if I had imagined the entire encounter, but I knew I had not. I saw him clearly. I touched him. He was real, physical, present. I began researching. I reviewed admission records going back to 1983, cross referenced descriptions of the rotation patient with photographs of actual patients from that era. I found a match. David Mora, admitted October 1985, age 42, diagnosed with AIDS, severe pneumocystis pneumonia, multiple opportunistic infections. He was treated in the fifth floor ward for 6 months. He died on April 3rd, 1986. In bed 12, the same bed where he was first reported appearing. His photograph matched perfectly. Same face, same lesions, same build, same age. David Mora had been dead for 18 years, but he was still appearing in our ward. I dug deeper, found his medical records, read his case notes. He had been transferred between beds multiple times during his stay. Isolation requirements, room changes, medical procedures. He occupied 11 different beds over 6 months. The same beds where staff reported seeing him. The exact rotation pattern, bed by bed, following his historical placement. I interviewed staff who had encountered him, asked detailed questions, recorded their descriptions. Every detail matched David Mora, his appearance, his hospital gown, even the specific lesions documented in his medical records. But there was one detail that did not match the historical record: a birthmark, distinctive, crescent shaped, on his left forearm. Every witness described it. I checked his medical charts, no mention of a birthmark. I searched for photographs, found one taken during his admission. The birthmark was visible, clear, unmistakable, but it was not mentioned in any medical documentation. Standard protocol would require notation of identifying marks, but it was absent from his records. Someone had removed it, deliberately, years ago. Why? I requested his death certificate. Cause of death: pneumocystis pneumonia, standard AIDS complication. Nothing unusual, but there was an annotation, added later, in different handwriting. Autopsy declined by family. Body cremated immediately. No autopsy, no examination, just immediate cremation. Unusual for that era. Medical research on AIDS was intensive. Bodies were often studied with family consent. Immediate cremation was rare. I contacted the hospital's records department, requested autopsy records for other patients who died in 1986, found dozens. detailed examinations, thorough documentation. David Mora was the only patient whose body was not examined, the only one cremated immediately, the only one whose records had been modified. I tried to locate his family, found an obituary, survived by a sister. I tracked her down. She was still living in San Francisco. I visited her on June 14th, 2023. She was elderly, frail, but her memory was sharp. I never authorized cremation, she told me. I wanted a funeral, a burial, but the hospital said David had signed a directive, advanced cremation order. I never saw the paperwork. They just told me it was done. Did David have a birthmark on his left forearm? She looked at me strangely. Yes, crescent shaped. He was born with it. Why? Just confirming details. She studied me carefully. People still see him, don't they? In the hospital. I have heard the stories. Nurses talk. Word spreads. I did not deny it. He is still there, she said quietly, because something was wrong, something they covered up, and he cannot rest until the truth is known. I asked what she meant. She would not elaborate, just shook her head and closed the door. I have not stopped seeing him. None of us have. David Mora still rotates through the ward, bed by bed, following his historical pattern, appearing, vanishing, silent. But now I notice something else, his scar pattern, a specific mark on his right shoulder, a surgical scar documented in 1985. Small, neat, professional, except the orientation is wrong. The scar runs horizontally in his medical photographs, but when he appears, the scar runs vertically, as if someone altered his body. Before cremation, before anyone could examine him properly. I do not know what was done to David Mora. I do not know why his records were modified, why his body was cremated immediately, why he still appears in our ward after 37 years. But I know he is trying to show us something, the birthmark, the scar, the rotation pattern, details we are supposed to notice, clues we are meant to follow, until we understand, until we uncover what was hidden. He will keep appearing, bed by bed, silent, waiting for someone to finally see the truth. I didn't believe in the dead returning until one of them asked me for help. My name is Dr. Priya Desai, and I have worked as a tuberculosis specialist at Hinduja Hospital in Mumbai for 14 years. I treat multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, managing patients through months-long treatment regimens that require strict adherence and intensive monitoring. I have seen the devastating effects of noncompliance, patients who stop taking medications, patients who develop resistance, patients who die because they could not follow the protocol. I understand the importance of compliance, the necessity of obedience to medical instruction, the difference between survival and death. But I cannot explain what happens in Isolation Room 8. The tuberculosis isolation unit is on the 6th floor. Room 8 is at the end of the corridor. Standard setup, negative pressure ventilation, sealed door, observation window, medical equipment. Everything a TB patient needs for safe isolation and treatment. But patients who stay in room 8 change within 72 hours. Always the same pattern, always the same result. They become perfectly compliant. Not just cooperative, not just obedient, perfect. They take medications at exactly the right time. They follow every instruction without question. They anticipate medical procedures before staff explain them. They move in perfect synchronization during examinations, as if they are being controlled. I first noticed it in August 2021. A 47-year-old man named Rajesh Sharma. He was admitted with extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis. Difficult patient, non-compliant history, multiple treatment failures. He had a pattern of starting medications and stopping when he felt better. We placed him in room 8, standard isolation protocol. I explained his medication schedule, the importance of completion, the risks of resistance. He was hostile, argumentative, refused to commit to the full treatment course. That was day 1. Day 2, he was cooperative, pleasant, took his medications when offered, asked appropriate questions, showed an understanding. Day 3, he was perfect. He knew the medication schedule before I told him. He positioned himself for examination before I asked. He followed instructions I had not yet given. When I reached for his chart, he had already prepared his arm for blood draw. It was efficient, impressive, but unsettling. I asked him how he knew what to do. I just know, he said calmly. I understand what is needed. Who told you the schedule? No one. I simply know it. His eyes were clear. His voice was steady. He showed no signs of confusion or delusion, but his behavior was impossible. He anticipated procedures he had never experienced. He followed protocols he had never been taught. I documented the change, reported it as positive behavioral adjustment, excellent compliance. Treatment proceeded smoothly. He was discharged 6 months later, fully cured, perfect, adherence to the entire regimen, not a single missed dose. I thought it was an isolated success story until it happened again. Different patient, same room, same 72-hour transformation, from non-compliant to perfectly obedient. And again, every patient assigned to room 8. Without exception, I began tracking the pattern, documented behavioral changes, recorded interview responses, compared baseline personality assessments with post 72-hour evaluations. The changes were identical. Every patient exhibited the same characteristics, same level of compliance, same anticipatory behavior, same calm certainty, as if they were all following the same invisible instructions. I reviewed the room's history. Room 8 had been in operation since 2007. I searched for incident reports, patient complaints, staff observations, found nothing unusual in official records. But I asked the senior nurses, the ones who had worked there longest. Room 8 patients are always easy, one nurse told me. They never cause problems, never resist, never complain. We call it the compliance room. How long has this been happening? Since the beginning, since 2007. I requested the original construction records, found architectural plans, structural specifications, ventilation diagrams. Everything appeared standard, but there was an annotation, handwritten, added during construction. Foundation issue resolved. Proceed with original plans. Foundation issue. What kind of issue? I contacted the construction company. They had no records from 2007. The project manager had retired. The files were archived and inaccessible. I examined the room personally, searched every surface, checked equipment, inspected walls, floor, ceiling, found nothing unusual, just a standard isolation room. But I felt it, standing in that space, a pressure, subtle, constant, like being watched, like being evaluated. I spent an hour in the room, alone, observing, waiting, and I heard it, faint, almost imperceptible, a whisper, not in English, not in Hindi, not in any language I recognized, but I understood it. Instructions, commands, directions, telling me what to do, where to stand, how to move, what to think. I left the room immediately. My heart was racing. I felt violated, as if something had tried to enter my mind, to control my actions. I filed a formal complaint, requested the room be sealed. Administration denied the request. The room had excellent patient outcomes, perfect compliance rates, no medical justification for closure. But I refused to assign patients to room 8. I used other isolation rooms, accepted lower compliance rates, managed more difficult cases. Until November 3rd, 2022, we were at capacity. Every isolation room was full. A new admission arrived. Severe TB, immediate isolation required. Room 8 was the only option. I had no choice. I admitted her. As 29-year-old woman named Anjali Patel, previously non-compliant, treatment failures, high-risk case. Day 1, she was resistant, angry, refused medications, demanded discharge. Day 2, she was cooperative, calm, accepting. Day 3, she was perfect, following instructions before they were given, anticipating every procedure, moving in synchronization with medical staff. But there was something else, something new. When I examined her, she spoke. "They want me to tell you something," she said quietly. "Who wants you to tell me?" "The ones who are here, the ones who never left." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "This room was built over them. They are still below, still waiting. They teach us, they show us how to comply, how to follow, how to obey. There is no one below this room." She smiled, empty, automatic. "There are 17, buried during construction, foundation issue. They were resolved but not removed, just covered, built over, forgotten." I left the room, contacted administration, demanded ground penetrating radar, structural analysis, full investigation. They refused. Insufficient cause, no evidence of structural compromise. But I know what is beneath room 8. I know why patients become compliant. I know what whispers instructions into their minds. 17 bodies, buried beneath the floor, sealed in concrete, waiting, teaching, controlling, and every patient who stays in that room learns from them, absorbs their commands, becomes part of their collective obedience. The room is still operational, still achieving perfect compliance, still producing excellent outcomes, but I know the cost. I know what patients sacrifice, their autonomy, their will, their self. Because room 8 does not teach compliance. It creates it through something buried below, something that should have been moved, something that refuses to rest. And every 72 hours, it claims another mind. If you ever work nights here, Don't look directly at the man in the reflection. My name is Dr. Michael Harrison, and I have worked as an infectious disease physician at Toronto General Hospital for 16 years. I specialize in emerging infectious diseases and outbreak response. I was part of the team that managed the SARS outbreak in 2003. I have worked through public health emergencies. I have treated patients in crisis. I understand pandemic protocols better than most people understand their own medical history, but I cannot explain the static in the SARS isolation unit. The unit was established during the SARS outbreak in 2003. Dedicated space for highly infectious respiratory cases, negative pressure rooms, strict PPE protocols, intensive monitoring. We treated 47 patients in that unit. 14 died. The rest recovered. The unit was decommissioned in 2004. SARS was contained. The threat passed. The rooms were cleaned, sealed, and left empty. But the equipment remained connected. Hospital policy required maintaining emergency preparedness infrastructure, monitors, ventilators, communication systems, all powered, all functional, ready for the next outbreak. That was the mistake. The static started in 2006. Security staff reported hearing interference on the communication channels, electronic noise, rhythmic patterns coming from the sealed SARS unit. Engineering investigated, found no malfunctions. The equipment was functioning correctly, but the static persisted, audible through headphones, visible on audio spectrum analyzers, a specific frequency pattern, consistent, repeating. They tried filtering it, blocking it, replacing equipment. Nothing worked. The static remained, always the same pattern, always the same frequency. In 2009, a research team analyzed the audio. They discovered something disturbing. The static was not random noise. It had structure, rhythm, information. It was a signal, encoded data, transmitting continuously from the empty SARS unit. But when they attempted to decode it, every recording became corrupted. Files would not open. Data would fragment. Storage devices would fail. The pattern was documented once, a single successful recording. It showed a waveform unlike anything in standard communication protocols. Biological rhythms embedded in electronic noise, heartbeats, breathing patterns, neural activity, as if something living was transmitting through the equipment. The recording was stored on a secure server, backed up multiple times, but within 24 hours, every copy corrupted simultaneously. The data dissolved into static, irretrievable, lost. No one could explain it. The recording existed, multiple engineers verified it, but it could not be preserved, could not be analyzed, could not be shared, as if something did not want to be understood. I learned about the static in 2019. I was reviewing historical outbreak data for a research paper. I found references to the SARS unit, the unexplained interference, the corrupted recordings. I requested access to the sealed unit. Administration granted permission. I entered alone on March 7th, 2020. The unit was exactly as it had been left. 17 years abandoned, but clean, preserved. The air felt stale but not stagnant. The equipment hummed quietly, power flowing through systems that had not been used in nearly 2 decades. I walked through the ward. 6 isolation rooms, empty beds, dark windows, silent spaces where 47 people fought for breath, where 14 people died. I reached the central monitoring station. The screens were dark, the keyboards covered in dust. But the speakers were active, powered on, waiting. I put on a pair of headphones, connected to the communication system, listened. Static, immediate, overwhelming. A roar of electronic noise that filled my ears. I reached to remove the headphones, but I heard something beneath the static. Faint, rhythmic, breathing, not one person, multiple people, overlapping, gasping, struggling, the sound of patients in respiratory distress, desperate for air, drowning in their own lungs. I removed the headphones. The sound stopped. The room was silent. I should have left, but I needed to understand. I put the headphones back on. The static returned, louder, more intense, and beneath it, voices, whispering, speaking, calling out, dozens of them, overlapping, incomprehensible. I tried to focus, to isolate individual voices, to understand what they were saying. Then one voice became clear, cutting through the static, speaking directly to me. It is still here, male voice, strained, weak, familiar. I checked the patient records later, matched the voice to Dr. James Chen, infectious disease physician. He contracted SARS while treating patients in this unit. He died in room 3 on May 17th, 2003. I heard his voice, clear, unmistakable, warning me. It is still here, in the equipment, in the air, in the walls. It never left. The static intensified. I felt pressure building in my chest, in my lungs, making it hard to breathe. I tore off the headphones, gasped for air. The pressure released. I could breathe normally, but my ears were ringing, high pitched tone, painful, persistent. I left the unit immediately, filed a report, recommended permanent disconnection of all electronic equipment, complete power shutdown, decommissioning, administration approved, engineers disconnected the systems, cut power to the entire unit, sealed the electrical access. The equipment went dark. The static stopped for 6 months, silent. Gone. Then COVID 19 arrived. 2020, global pandemic. Hospital capacity overwhelmed. We needed isolation space. Emergency authorization was granted to reactivate the SARS unit. Power was restored. Equipment was reconnected. The unit became operational again. The static returned immediately. Same frequency, same pattern, but stronger, more complex. More voices, not just SARS patients, now COVID patients, hundreds of them, thousands, all transmitting through the same network, all trapped in the same signal. Staff reported hearing the voices through any audio equipment in the hospital, not just in the SARS unit, anywhere. Phones, intercoms, monitors. The static was spreading, infecting every connected system. IT attempted to isolate it, created firewalls, disconnected networks, shut down communication channels. Nothing worked. The static found new pathways. New equipment, new frequencies, and everyone who listened through headphones reported the same experience: pressure in the chest, difficulty breathing, the sensation of drowning, lasting for hours after exposure. 3 staff members developed acute respiratory symptoms after extended exposure to the static. No infection detected, no pathogen identified, but their lungs showed scarring, damage. as if they had been exposed to a respiratory disease that did not exist. The SARS unit is still operational. We still use it for isolation cases. We still monitor patients through the connected equipment, but we do not use audio systems. We do not wear headphones. We communicate through text only. Visual signals, avoiding the static. Because we know what it is now, we understand what is transmitting through the equipment. Not a signal, not interference, not electronic noise. It is the disease itself, preserved, encoded, living inside the network, waiting for someone to listen, waiting for someone to open the channel, waiting to breathe into new lungs. And every time someone puts on headphones in that unit, they hear it. The static, the voices, the breathing, and something transfers, something small, something viral, something that should have died 17 years ago, but it did not die. It adapted. It found a new host, not human tissue, electronic systems, and now it waits. In the static, forever transmitting, forever infectious, forever alive.